The key was cold in my palm, a tarnished silver thing Vivian had given me on my 25th birthday. We sat on the floor of my first apartment, surrounded by half-unpacked boxes, drinking cheap wine. "It's a key to nothing," she'd said, her eyes sparkling with that conspiratory light I adored. "It's a reminder that your life, your real life, doesn't need a lock. It's an open door. And I'll always be standing in the doorway cheering you on." I clutched that key until the metal warmed. It felt like a sacrament. At the time, I didn't see the poetry of her words. "I'll always be standing in the doorway." Not walking through with me, not following behind. Standing in the doorway. A gatekeeper, a guardian. I only felt the overwhelming gratitude that someone like her, polished, confident, effortlessly powerful, had chosen someone like me. That was Vivian's magic. She didn't just enter your life, she curated it. She was the architect of my confidence, the witness to my struggles, the ally who saw all. When my passion for bespoke hand-bound journals, my tiny dream of Elara Scriptorium felt silly and small, she was the one who said, "Wait, get a stable job first, build a safety net. A dream that fragile needs protection." It sounded like wisdom. It felt like love. I didn't realize she was building the walls of my cage, one concerned brick at a time. She was the one who gently suggested that my childhood friend, Liam, was a bit of an energy drain. That my colleague Sarah was clearly jealous of our connection with our boss. One by one, the threads of my other relationships frayed and snapped, until the only reflection I had of myself was the one she held up for me. And in that reflection, I was lucky to have her. And then there was Mark. Did you ever confuse dependence with loyalty? I met Mark at a library fundraiser. He was a graphic designer with ink-stained fingers and a laugh that felt like the first day of spring. For the first time in years, I felt a flicker of something that belonged entirely to me outside of Vivian's orbit. I told her about him, my voice giddy with the hope I hadn't felt in a long time. Her smile was tight. "He seems lovely, Alara. Just be careful. New people can be disruptive. You're so sensitive. I'd hate to see you get hurt." The small anomaly was the email. A week later, she accidentally forwarded me a chain, a supposed conversation between Mark and a friend where he mockingly referred to my quaint little book hobby. The words were a perfect, devastating match for my deepest insecurities. I felt the old, familiar dread curl in my stomach. Vivian was right. Again. I pulled back from Mark. I let his calls go to voicemail. The first open loop was sealed shut, not with a bang, but with the quiet, satisfied click of a lock turning, a lock I didn't even see Vivian hold. The stage was set. The pieces were in place, and I, the willing protagonist, was blind to the script she had written for my life. The crack in my perfect, curated world didn't appear with a dramatic thunderclap. It was a hairline fracture, so fine I almost missed it. It happened on a Tuesday. My phone, a sleek device Vivian had helped me choose. You need the best, Alara. Don't sell yourself short. Slipped from my hand as I rushed to answer a call from a potential client. It hit the hardwood floor of my apartment with a sickening crunch. The screen, from corner to corner, became a spider web of broken light. A wave of pure panic washed over me. That phone was my lifeline to my clients, my carefully managed calendar, and of course, to Vivian. Our constant stream of messages was the bedrock of my daily life. Feeling utterly on edge, I rushed to the tech store, my heart thumping a frantic rhythm against my ribs. The young technician at the store, with tired eyes and a name tag that read Leo, took the phone with a non-committal grunt. "Might be a few hours," he said, already looking past me. I nodded, feeling strangely untethered, and went to a nearby cafe to wait. The silence in my head feeling louder than any noise. 2 hours later, Leo called me back to the counter. His expression had changed. The boredom was gone, replaced with a cautious, almost pitying curiosity. "Got your data transferred to this loaner?" he said, handing me a generic model. "But, while we were backing it up, we found something. A diagnostic glitch from the fall, I guess. It seems, well, you should see for yourself." He gestured to a monitor on the counter. On it was a file directory, and there, nestled among my folders of photos and documents, was a folder with a name that made my blood run cold. VivOps /Alara/Mark Project. VivOps? Vivian Operations. My breath hitched. No, this is a mistake, a glitch, like he said. With a trembling hand, I took the mouse and clicked. Inside were subfolders /social isolation /career stall /dependency metrics, and one simply titled /mark neutralization. I opened the mark folder. My vision tunneled. There it was, the source of the damning email. It wasn't a forwarded chain after all. It was a draft, meticulously composed in a fake email client, saved as a PDF. It was a fabrication, a piece of theater designed to make me retreat from the one person who had made me feel seen in years. The world did not so much shatter as it deflated. The air left my lungs. The color drained from the room. The sound of the cafe, the whirring of the coffee grinder, the chatter of patrons muffled into a distant, hollow roar. I was blindsided. This was the calculated deceit, not a crime of passion, but a cold, intellectual project. That's when the abandonment truly hit me. Not the fear of being alone, but the terrifying realization that I had been alone for years, living inside a snow globe that Vivian would periodically shake for her own amusement. In that moment of chaos, would you have blamed yourself first? I did. My first staggering thought was not, how could she, but What did I do to deserve this? The foundation of a decade crumbled, and I immediately looked for the flaw in my own construction. The shock was so profound, it looped back into a bizarre, icy calm. I thanked Leo in a voice that didn't sound like my own. I walked out of the store, the loaner phone feeling like a lead weight in my hand. I didn't call Vivian. I didn't scream or cry. I went home, sat on the floor in the very spot she had given me the key to nothing, and I began to dig. The VivOps folder was a treasure map of my own manipulation. I found logs of conversations she'd had with my friends, subtly poisoning them against me. I found a timeline for stalling a Lara scriptorium with notes like, encourage stability over risk and maintain primary influence over financial decisions. I saw the surprising backstory begin to whisper at the edges of the data, a referenced incident post-trauma from Clara, but the details were encrypted, a ghost in the machine. The person I had trusted to hold my story had been writing a different one entirely, and I was not the heroine. I was the hostage. I don't remember paying Leo. I don't remember the walk home. My body was on autopilot, a vessel carrying a mind that had been systematically dismantled. The loaner phone felt alien in my hand, a brick of silent accusations. I ended up on my kitchen floor, my back against the cabinets, the cold linoleum a stark contrast to the feverish heat of my skin. The VivOps folder was a ghost in the machine, but its specter was now burned onto the back of my eyelids. I could see the cold sans serif font of the folder names every time I blinked. This has to be a misunderstanding. The thought was a desperate final lifeline. My mind, reeling from the shock, scrambled for a sane explanation. Maybe it's a project for her work, a psychological case study she couldn't talk about. Maybe it's about her own issues and she used my name as a placeholder. It was pathetic. It was the attempt to revert in its most primal form, the psyche's refusal to accept a reality so horrifying that it would rather believe in an infinitely more complex and unlikely lie. I couldn't breathe in the silence of my apartment. The walls, which had once felt like a sanctuary, now felt like they were lined with Vivian's listening ears. I was on edge, my nerves stripped raw. I had to hear her voice. I had to make her explain it away. I had to hear her call me silly Lara and tell me I was overreacting, that it was all for a project to help me. With fingers that shook so violently, I misdialed twice. I called her. It rang once, twice. Alara? Hey, what's up? You never call this line. Her voice was light, melodic, the same voice that had talked me down from 100 anxieties. It was the sound of home, and now it felt like a weapon. Vivian. My voice was a rasp, a stranger's. My phone broke. Oh, honey, no, that's a nightmare. Do you need me to come over? I can bring wine and we can... I saw it. The words cut her off, flat and heavy. A beat of silence. Then, carefully, saw what, sweetie? The folder. On my phone. The VivOps folder. The name tasted like acid on my tongue. The silence on the other end of the line was different now. It was no longer curious. It was charged. A live wire. I could almost hear her calculations whirring behind her eyes. Alara, I have no idea what you're talking about. Her tone was still gentle, but there was a new steel beneath it. The first lie to my face after a decade of truth. You must have gotten a virus, or that tech guy messed with your phone. You're so trusting. It's one of the things I love about you, but you have to be careful. She was doing it again. Even now, in the face of my discovery, she was framing my clarity as naivety, my evidence as a symptom of my gullibility. The guilt and self-blame she had cultivated in me for years rose like a tidal wave, threatening to pull me under. I'm not paranoid, I cried, the tears finally breaking free, hot and shameful. I saw it. I have the files. Files can be faked, she said, her voice dropping into a low, concerned register. The ally witness was back, but now she was witnessing my descent into madness. I think you should come over. Let me take care of you. We'll figure this out. You're not well. And for a terrifying second, I considered it. The pull was that strong. To let her take this burden, to let her explain it all away, to crawl back into the gilded cage where everything made sense because she said it did. The despondent hopelessness was a sedative, whispering that it was easier to be crazy than to be betrayed. But then I saw the spreadsheet in my mind's eye. Liam, threat level 8, neutralization strategy. No. I whispered, the word feeling like a shard of glass in my throat. No, Vivian.
I hung up. The line went dead. The silence in my apartment was no longer just heavy. It was absolute. The last thread had been cut. The attempt to revert had demonstrably failed. There was no going back. The door to the cage was open, and I was standing on the threshold, terrified of the vast, unknown world outside. Pause and tell me, Team Revenge or Team Forgiveness? I'm reading every comment.
The silence after I hung up was the loudest sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of a universe collapsing. For 3 days, I moved through my life like a ghost. I called in sick to work. I ignored the world. The despondent hopelessness was a physical weight pressing me into my mattress. But on the 4th day, a new emotion began to smolder beneath the grief, a cold, clear fury. She had called me paranoid. She had tried to pathologize my perfectly sane reaction to her insane betrayal. That was the final, unforgivable lie. It was the twist that shifted my focus from heartbroken victim to determined investigator. This was no longer about saving our friendship. It was about saving my sanity, my reality. I had to know why. I powered up my old dusty laptop, the one Vivian had always dismissed as too slow for serious work. It was untouched by her influence. I created a new secure email, and I began to dig. The VivOps folder was my Rosetta Stone. I cross-referenced the names and dates with my own hazy memories. I reached out to Liam, my message awkward and full of shame. I know this is out of the blue, but do you remember a conversation with Vivian about your financial struggles a few years ago? His reply was swift. Ilara? Wow,
Yeah, I remember. She called me irresponsible and said you were worried I'd ask to borrow money. It really hurt. I figured you'd chosen her over me. Each reply was a piece of shrapnel tearing open an old wound. Sarah confirmed Vivian had hinted I thought she was competitive and jealous. My old boss, Mr. Adams, even mentioned in passing that Vivian had once sweetly checked in on my stress levels, suggesting I might not be ready for more creative, independent projects. The pattern was undeniable. The surprising backstory was the only missing piece. The file in the folder had mentioned Clara, a name I'd never heard. I spent nights falling down internet rabbit holes, searching for any trace of a Clara in Vivian's past. Social media, old alumni pages, anything. It was like searching for a ghost. Until I remembered the encrypted file, the one labeled Post-Trauma Clara Archive. I am not a hacker, but desperation is a powerful teacher. I tried every password I could think of, her birthday, her mother's name, her favorite book, nothing. Then, driven by a gut-wrenching instinct, I typed the one thing I knew she would never, ever use, but that was central to her entire operation. My name, Elara. The file decrypted with a soft click. It wasn't a spreadsheet. It was a journal. Vivian's private journal entry scanned and saved. And I finally met Clara. Clara was Vivian's older sister, the brilliant, charismatic sister who was everything she wasn't. The entries were a chronicle of adoration and seething resentment. Clara, who promised to take Vivian to Paris and then left without her. Clara, who borrowed Vivian's life savings to start a business and then cut her off when she asked for it back, calling her needy and a drain. The final entry was dated a month before Vivian and I met. Clara is gone. She said I was a black hole of need and she couldn't fuel me anymore. She said I would always be alone because I'm a poison. She took everything. My money, my trust, my future. Never again. I will never be left like that again. I will never be the one who needs. I will be the one who is needed. I will become so essential, so woven into the fabric of someone's life that leaving me would be like tearing out their own soul. I will be the architect, not the tenant. I sat back. The air punched from my lungs. The core wound was laid bare. Pathological fear of abandonment and loss aversion. It was all there. Clara's betrayal had broken her, and in that broken place, a monstrous plan had been born. I was the project. I was the chosen one, not for a prophecy of greatness, but for an experiment in control. My kindness was a vulnerability she could exploit. My dreams were levers she could pull. My loneliness was the fertile ground where her dependency metrics would bloom. She hadn't set out to hate me. In her twisted logic, she had set out to secure me, to make me so dependent, so isolated, that I could never ever do what Clara had done. The calculated deceit was her perverted version of love. It was a life sentence of loyalty, handed down to prevent a repeat of her own trauma. Is the worst kind of betrayal the one you never saw coming? And then I found it, the final, devastating piece. A subfolder within the archive I had missed. /scriptorium acquisition. My blood ran cold. It wasn't just about stalling my dream. It was about
owning it. There were drafted legal documents, templates for a business partnership where Vivian would hold a 51% controlling interest. There was a timeline for when my financial desperation would be optimal for her to swoop in with a rescue offer to fund the scriptorium with herself as the majority owner. The betrayal was not just emotional. It was a long-term scheme to own my passion, my creation, and by extension, me. Forever. The shock was gone. The grief was gone. All that was left was a cold, clear fury. This was no longer a personal tragedy. It was a hostile takeover of a human life, and I was ready to launch a counteroffensive.
The cold, clarifying rage did not make me reckless. It made me focused. For the first time in a decade, my mind was my own. The static of Vivian's constant commentary, the second guessing, the need for her approval, it was all gone, burned away in the fire of that decrypted journal. This was no longer about emotion. It was a negotiation for my soul. I spent a week preparing. I compiled the evidence into a simple, damning folder. Screenshots of the VivOps directories, excerpts from her journal about Clara, the drafted partnership agreement for my scriptorium. I did not do it for revenge. I did it as an act of self-forgiveness. Each piece of evidence was a receipt proving the purchase price of my stolen years. It was my absolution from the guilt and self-blame she had cultivated in me. I was not going to scream. I was not going to cry. I was going to state facts. I was going to set healthy boundaries. This was the hard stuff. I texted her, no call, just simple, unadorned words. We need to talk, in person, my apartment, tomorrow at 7 p.m. She replied within seconds, her tone dripping with concerned performance. Of course, sweetie, I've been so worried. I'll be there. We'll fix this. We'll fix this. The words that had once been a comfort now felt like a threat. When she arrived, she looked the same as always, impeccable, concerned, her face a mask of loving anxiety. She moved to hug me. I took a small, deliberate step back. "Let's sit," I said, my voice calm. It was not the voice of the Ilara she knew. The mask flickered. Confusion. Then a sliver of unease. "Ilara, what's going on? You're scaring me with this coldness." I ignored the bait. I placed the folder on the coffee table, between us. "I am not here to fight, Vivian. I'm here to inform you our relationship is over." She let out a little laugh, a brittle, nervous sound. "What? Because of some fake files? Honey, we've been through this. You're not well." "The files aren't fake," I said, my gaze steady. "I decrypted the Clara archive." The change was instantaneous. All the color drained from her face. The performance vanished, replaced by a raw animal panic. The core wound had been exposed. You had no right," she whispered, her voice trembling with a real emotion for the first time. "I had every right," I replied, the calm in my voice a fortress. You have been operating on me for 10 years. You isolated me from Liam, from Sarah. You sabotaged my career. You fabricated evidence to destroy my connection with Mark. And you planned to steal my business. I pushed the folder toward her. It's all there. The dependency metrics, the neutralization strategies. Your sister's betrayal broke you, Vivian, and instead of healing, you decided to break me to make yourself whole. This was the theatrical justice, not a shouting match, but a surgical dismantling. Her composure shattered. The calculated antagonist was gone, replaced by a terrified, cornered child. "You don't understand," she cried, her voice cracking with a real emotion. "I did it to keep you. I did it so you would never leave me. Everything I did was to protect what we had." "You didn't protect it," I said, my heart a steady, quiet drum in my chest. "You poisoned it. You built a prison and called it a home. And I am evicting you from my life." The desperation in her eyes was terrifying. It was the fear of abandonment made manifest. "You can't. You need me. What will you do without me? You'll fall apart. You'll be nothing." It was the last desperate gasp of her control, the final attempt to hook the old dependent me. I looked at her, and I felt not hatred, but a profound, aching pity. "I was always enough, Vivian. You were the one who never believed you were." I stood up, walking to the door. I opened it. "This is the last time we will speak. Do not contact me again. Do not come near my friends, my family, or my future business." She stared at me, her eyes wide with a kind of horrified awe. She had written the script for this confrontation 100 times in her mind, but in every version, I was the one begging, crying, crumbling. I had rewritten the ending. "You'll regret this," she hissed, the threat empty and weak. "No," I said, my hand on the doorknob. "I already have, for 10 years. The regret ends now." I watched her walk out, her shoulders slumped in a defeat she could never have calculated for. I closed the door. The lock clicked shut, but for the first time, I was on the right side of it. What is the hardest boundary you ever had to set to protect your peace? The silence that filled my apartment after she left was different. It wasn't the heavy, suffocating silence of shock or the frantic silence of despondency. This was a clean, wide-open silence. It was space. It was potential. It was, for the first time, mine. In the days that followed, there were no dramatic victories. There was no triumphant music. There was only the quiet, deliberate work of rebuilding trust, not with others, but with myself. My own instincts, for so long silenced by Vivian's commentary, began to whisper again. I listened. The first thing I did was call Mark. My voice didn't shake. I told him the truth, the whole humiliating, unbelievable truth. I didn't soften it or make excuses. I simply laid it out as the fact it was. He was silent for a long moment. "I knew it," he said finally, his voice soft with understanding, not triumph. "I knew the person I'd started to get to know wouldn't believe that email without a conversation. I'm so sorry you went through that, Alara. It wasn't an immediate reconciliation. It was a beginning, a first fragile thread of a new connection, built on a foundation of honesty instead of manipulation. Next, I wrote to Liam and Sarah. Long, careful emails apologizing not for my actions, but for my blindness, for allowing someone to come between us. Their responses were laced with the hurt of years, but beneath it was a warmth I had thought was lost forever. The isolation was not a permanent state. It had been a policy, and I had just repealed it. But the most profound work was internal. This was the true internal growth. I had to practice self-compassion. I had to forgive myself for not seeing the prison walls. I had to look at the dependency metrics and not see my weakness, but the evidence of my profound capacity for trust, which had been weaponized against me. I took the key, the tarnished silver key to nothing, from my jewelry box. I held its cold weight in my palm. It no longer felt like a chain. It felt like a token, a reminder that my life did not need a gatekeeper, that it was, and always had been, an open door. I started small. I bought a single, beautiful, blank journal. I didn't call it Ilara's Scriptorium. I just called it mine. And I began to sketch, not business plans, just lines and shapes, dreams without a deadline, passion without a metric. This was the tangible representation of my inner peace. I was reclaiming the old passion Vivian discouraged, not for success, but for the simple, soul-level joy of it. The noise was gone. The constant anxiety of whether I was enough, whether I was doing it right, whether I was pleasing her. The quiet that replaced it was the you were always enough realized. The healing was not the victory over the villain. It was the internal resolution of the self-blame. I had gone looking for the source of my pain, expecting to find a monster, and I had found a wounded, terrified child in a woman's body, and in doing so, I had found the wounded child in me. I tended to her. I told her she was safe now. I became her confidant. If this story of quiet strength and finding your way back to yourself touched your heart, subscribe to join our community of quiet warriors. We are learning together that our peace is our greatest power. So, my dear listener, if you take anything from this story, let it be this. The most powerful boundary you will ever set is not a no to someone else. It is a yes to yourself. It is the quiet, unshakable decision to stop living inside someone else's story and to finally, courageously begin to writing your own. Your story of heartful healing awaits. All you have to do is turn the page.